Our next speaker is doing a talk called Transparency in Subversive, Open Source Algorithmic Governance in the Metaversal Age. Please put your hands together for the co-founder of MetaFrang, Dana Licata.
Hello, and thank you for coming to my talk. I am very passionate about decentralization. So transparency is subversive will be on the necessity of open sourcing governance tools, particularly in a metaversal context. So I will start with a brief introduction of myself, and then I'll give a bit of a thesis or an overview. So, how do I change it? Change the slide? Okay, there you go. So yeah, my name is Dana Licata. I've been in the crypto space since 2016 as an avid researcher and investor, and also just as an enthusiast. So currently I am the co-founder and CTO of MetaFrag. So very quickly, that is a platform for collaborative governance. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So that is a platform for collaborative governance over metaverse land, and it's also a curated marketplace. Basically, we just want to mobilize the liquidity that's laying dormant in metaverse land, and we want to mobilize it in a way that uses both DeFi and traditional methods. So here's a thesis. It's a lot of words, which you're not supposed to do, but basically to sum it up, digital transparency is inherently subversive because it challenges the status quo of current user experiences when looking at the framework of the old hegemony of Web 2 systems and protocols. So really quickly, overview, I'll give a couple definitions so we're all on the same page. And then I'll also give a theoretical classification scheme. So if you're trying to evaluate an algorithmic tool, this is just a very abbreviated classification scheme. And then I'll talk about the virtues of transparency, or rather why I believe it to be necessary. And then I will detail some practical implementations using my company MetaFrag as an example. So just a quick note, I do use these terms in a highly anthropological sense because we're understanding the interactions between human and machine in a governmental standpoint. So algorithmic tool, that is an application wherein human decision is informed, influenced, or facilitated by code. So that would be like a standard DAO, that could even be something more centralized, like a city stat program, which actual cities are using. And I will add that most cryptocurrencies, tokens or token economic models, they all have an algorithmic element as well. And then finally, metaverse, just because I do reference the metaverse a lot. I define it as a shared immersive digital experience, of course, but what the main parameter for me is that you are interfacing with this digital world through an extension of yourself as an avatar. Okay, so here's the, it's super highly abbreviated, but this is, I call it the abusability metric. But basically it is derived from a more nuanced and taxonomical system I'm still developing. But for our purposes, I just wanted to give people a way to think about algocratic tools and how useful they can be for different protocols. So basically, it evaluates the reliance of a certain whatever you're evaluating. So let's say it's a very specific DAO, or it's just all DAOs in general. You can adapt this scale. So it tells us how reliant on centralized systems the application is, and whether it's more autocratic or discretionary, and how vulnerable to abuse it is. So it's very simple, just a score from 1 to 5. So we look at the domain. I mean, this is in no particular order, but first, domain. So that is what underpins the code. And so it's all a spectrum. So starting on the lower end of the spectrum, it is either like completely or mostly underpinned by some sort of distributed ledger or blockchain. And then on the other end of the scale, there is really no blockchain involved. It's completely mutable and easier to manipulate, of course. And then register is how much of the code is open source. So who has access to the code, who can actually see what the code does. So obviously that's just going to be the spectrum from like entirely open source to entirely closed source. And yeah, of course, everything in between. And then deployer is who deploys and or updates like the coded parameters. So who is making the decisions, and like who is going to be updating those decisions within the code. So what I mean when I say self-selecting individuals, that's more of like a community project. That's more of like you know, like a good old-fashioned like DeFi situation. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's a regulatory or commercial body. And so basically that could be like a governmental agency that's deploying the code, or it could be a corporation that's deploying the code. And so in turn, we look at the actors. And usually that's going to correspond very well with how people interact with the code. So on the lower end of the spectrum again, it's do these people have agency? Do they get to decide how they interact with the code on a more nuanced level, or are they more objectified, right? So if we have these like regulatory bodies and these commercial bodies, then those things tend to treat people more as objects and just like consumers. And a lot of the time, people don't even necessarily know what sort of like code in this capacity that they're like interfacing with. So it's very objectifying. All right, so, and then here's just like a quick little application of the framework. So obviously it's a very simple method of calculating it. You just take the average, so you add up all of the metrics, and since there were 4 things that we were looking at, we divide it by 4. So it's a pretty like a broad brush inventory. And it basically applies to all types of like algocratic tools, and honestly Web3 applications in general, but with governance in mind. So then we have our scale, reliance on centralized systems, abuse and exploitation potential. So the more centralized it is, a lot of the times it's going to be exploited and abusable more easily, because no one is being held accountable and there's no real oversight from the community. And this is for like Web 2 and Web 3 applications. So I did just a very fast inventory on the bottom here. So like your average DAO is going to be like 1 to like 1.25, pretty hard to exploit if things are running well and properly. And then at the very other end of the spectrum, that's where you have your more like Web 2 applications that are imposed onto the individual instead of the individual reacting and being an agent. So that would be like advertising algorithms and things like CityStat, which I mentioned earlier, which is a software, and it helps inform things like predictive policing. So it's very, very interesting. Oh, and then this CBDC, so Dcash, very interesting really quickly. So Dcash was issued by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. It is currently running into some technological issues, but it is on the Hyperledger fabric. So while it is underpinned by distributed ledger, it's also quite centralized. So just an interesting thing that they're experimenting with. Okay. And then here on this section, it's the virtues of transparency really quickly. So we want to integrate tools that are less reliant on centralized systems. So we want the unreliant algocratic tools. And as you can see, there's obviously a lot of benefit both on the project side and the market side, because on the project side, you're actually publicly holding teams and developers accountable, which is of course, like very, very important in the crypto space. Yeah, and you definitely bolster community engagement. Yeah, and then on the market side, that's going to be more so of the longer term effects. And yeah, so what the ultimate goal is to challenge other entities to meet similar or higher standards of transparency, because we kind of want the tide to rise and bring the standards up. All right, so here's the spin, where I talk about my project some more. So this is just a very abbreviated version, very quickly, of how Metafrag, my little project, implements algocratic tools nearly at every turn, or at least in as many ways as possible. So first is like the economics. So it's like we have the token economics that's actually backing our native platform token. And then we have our community treasury, which is a very, very interesting and something that really excites me, because you can have a fund set up, and you can have people who are active in the community vote on how these funds are utilized. So if they want to see, for example, support for another chain or something, then somebody can propose that, and they say, let's use these community funds to add this to our project. And so from a regulatory standpoint, we have the platform-wide DAO, which is just for more general governance measures, not really having to do so much with like the treasury. And then finally, financial, and that's more so of like our products. So that's what we're offering and like giving to people. So basically, the way in which we want to mobilize the liquidity in land is through fragmented ownership, except we want to have a tool suite which is built around this fragmented ownership and collaborative governance of the fragmented land. And yeah, that's it for me. I will just say, again, that digital transparency is inherently subversive because it challenges the current status quo of the user experience in both Web3, but especially compared to like the centralized old hegemony of like tech, big tech, Web2, the old guys. So yeah, there's my information. And yeah, I hope you guys found it interesting. I don't know. Thank you.